The tray hits the counter. The cup tips over. Cold water runs down Jamal's sleeve. He tries to hold on, but Mr. Collins has already yanked everything out of the boy's hands. A loud, cutting voice for everyone to hear, "You don't belong here." The McDonald's dining room at 116th and Lexington goes quiet for a second. Fryers beep, kids pause with spoons halfway to their mouths, and the red and yellow sign casts a tired glow over the plastic tables. East Harlem is outside. Honking horns, a corn vendor shouting, "Fresh, hot!" But inside the air is warm, heavy with the smell of frying oil and overbrewed coffee. Jamal, 12, freezes. The grey hoodie sleeve is wet. In his pocket, coins make a timid sound, clink, clink, reminding him why he's here. Without raising his eyes, he hunches his shoulders like he's trying to make himself smaller. For weeks, he'd been saving every nickel, every penny, every quarter. He wanted a simple cheeseburger and a cup of water, more than food, a minute of a good memory. Him, his mom, and his grandma smiling in an old McDonald's photo, trays full, no one in a rush. "Move along, kid. You're taking up space," Collins growls. In a wrinkled dress shirt, crooked tie, badge worn like it's a badge of honor. He steps forward, puffed up with end-of-shift authority. His eyes scan Jamal from head to toe, not looking for anything, just measuring. A woman in line whispers, "This isn't right," but looks at her own shoes. A teenager in the back lifts his phone and starts recording, like he's afraid to miss an important play. Jamal takes half a step back. The floor feels safer than all those eyes. He breathes in, as if the air could push him out the door, and turns to leave. The metallic hiss of the automatic door slices through the moment. It opens with a burst of cold wind carrying the street inside. Damp coat smell, a scrap of Latin music from a car at the light. A man steps in, broad shoulders, black beanie low on his forehead, leather jacket that doesn't ask for attention but gets it anyway. A discreet chain glints under the fluorescent lights. He doesn't waste time trying to figure out the silence. He sees the wet kid, the abandoned tray, the manager armed with contempt. His gaze cuts through the air. What's going on here? The question lands firm, not an invitation to chat. Some people recognize him before the name clicks, others recognize him from the silence that follows. It's Tupac Shakur, street poet, the voice the neighborhood knows from cassette tapes, radio, boomboxes, the man who speaks up when it matters, and right now, it matters. Collins straightens, chest slightly out. His hand grips the counter edge like a trophy. "I'm handling my business," he snaps, the tone of someone who likes having an audience. Tupac takes 2 steps, just enough to put himself between Jamal and the manager. His body becomes a calm wall. He nods toward the tray, then toward Jamal, and says loud enough for the whole room, "He's sitting with me." The sound comes back in a collective, "Oh!" A kid's spoon clatters to the plate. The teenager with the phone leans in, video shaking. The woman in line lifts her face. Her eyes shine with something like borrowed courage. Jamal blinks slowly, as if the words could have been imagined, but they weren't. The voice still hums against the restaurant's low ceiling. Tupac doesn't take his eyes off Collins. It's a look that doesn't need to yell to be hard. He moves just enough for Jamal to feel the protection in the air. A hand lands on the boy's shoulder, simple, steady, saying, "You're with me," without spending words. Collins tries to get control back, straightens his tie. "There are rules here," he says louder, like he wants the echo to answer for him. "I can't just let anyone sit and—" "Anyone?" Tupac cuts in, eyebrow raising a fraction. "He paid." The clink of coins in Jamal's pocket answers for him. "And you don't talk to kids like that." 2 young men by the window exchange looks. A girl next to her mother leans forward on her chair to see better. An older man in a Yankees cap rises an inch from his seat, like his body is saying, "Finally." Tupac turns unhurriedly, grabs the tray off the counter. The cup is still dripping, the cheeseburger wrapper crumpled but intact. He places them back in Jamal's hands and points to a table in the center of the room, the one nobody picks because everyone walks past it. Sit there. Jamal obeys, unsure if he's hungry or if his heart is just pounding. The cold plastic chair creaks under his light weight. He sets the tray down like returning a picture to its proper place on the wall. An invisible spotlight clicks on over that table. Half the restaurant is now facing it. Tupac stands a second longer than necessary on purpose. It's a warning. Then he sits across from the boy, but keeps Collins in the corner of his eye. "Eat," he says quietly to Jamal, "then we'll talk." Jamal unwraps the cheeseburger with trembling fingers. The salty smell of hot beef rises, mixing with the fry oil, the coffee, and the cold air sneaking through the door. He takes the first bite carefully, like respecting an old ritual. Collins takes a step, as if to interrupt again, stops, sees 3 phones pointed at him, sees a couple twisting in their seats to watch, sees the woman in line lifting her chin, waiting. His authority twists along with his tie. For a moment he feels the room shift an inch away from him. Tupac rests his forearms on the table. No smile. He doesn't need one. "You've got a choice now," he says, still not looking directly at Collins. "You can treat him like a customer, or you can keep playing big man while the whole neighborhood's watching." The teenager in the back whispers, "Say it," to his own screen. The Yankees capman lets out an approving, "Uh-huh," the kind you hear in church. A young cashier behind the counter bites her lip, torn between fear for her job and relief that someone finally said what everyone felt. Jamal chews slowly. The sound of the paper crinkling under his fingers seems louder than it should. The world feels like it has let him back in. He doesn't need to look up to know. Someone is holding the space around him. Collins draws breath to answer, but his voice comes out thin. He coughs, tries to recover. I'm just following." "Respect isn't company policy," Tupac asks, like scoring a point without leaving his seat. A short silence, long enough for everyone to think about what they just saw. The cheap clock on the wall ticks in a rhythm nobody had noticed before. Cold wind tries to sneak in again as the door opens for a new customer. The metallic bell gives a ding, reminding everyone that outside, East Harlem goes on. 116th still rushing, bodegas lit, voices in Spanish and English crossing in the air, coats zipped to the chin, and the sense that here, in this worn-tile Mcdonald's, something had shifted. Tupac leans back in his chair, face still grave. He didn't come to talk. He came to step in. And he already has. The rest, the sharp words, the awakened audience, the manager feeling the ground slip, would come in the next few minutes. For now, what mattered was simple and big at the same time. The boy was sitting, and he was eating, and everyone was watching. Tupac wasn't one for beating around the bush. Anyone in that McDonald's in East Harlem that afternoon could tell the second he opened his mouth. There was no rehearsed politeness, no attempt to sugarcoat his tone. He spoke like someone who'd grown up hearing raw truths on street corners and knew that sometimes the most respectful way to talk was to say exactly what needed saying. Collins was still near the counter trying to pull himself together. He fiddled with his tie in a nearly nervous way, as if that could glue back the authority that had fallen to the floor, along with the cup of water. But Tupac didn't give him the time to rebuild the act. "So that's how you treat a kid in your restaurant?" The question came out more as an accusation than a doubt. He wasn't waiting for an answer. He paid, you saw it, and still you came and ripped the food out of his hands. Why? The word "why" hung in the air. Collins tried to answer, but Tupac raised a hand, cutting him off before the first syllable. "Don't tell me rules. Tell me the real reason. Is it because he's a kid? Because he's poor? Because he's black?" A low murmur came from the tables in the back. An older man in a leather jacket, eating nuggets alone, slowly shook his head in agreement. A mother with 2 kids pulled them closer, without taking her eyes off the scene. Collins took a deep breath. "Look, No, man, don't stall," Tupac shot back, leaning forward slightly. The gold chain tapped against his chest with the movement. "You don't talk to anybody like that, and especially not to a kid who just wants to eat what he bought." The cashier who'd given Jamal his tray dropped her gaze, maybe out of fear of Collins, maybe out of shame for staying silent earlier. The teenager filming adjusted his phone, now getting Collins in the foreground and Tupac right behind him. Tall, imposing, seated, but owning the space. "You know what I see here?" Tupac went on, looking at Collins but projecting his voice for the whole restaurant. "I see a man who thinks he's got the right to humiliate a boy because he thinks nobody will say anything. Today, you picked the wrong day and the wrong kid." A muffled "yeah" came from a nearby table. Someone clapped once, quick, reflexive, and stopped, but the sound lingered in the air, uncomfortable for Collins. Tupac looked over at Jamal. The boy chewed slowly, but his shoulders were less hunched. For the first time in a long while, he felt like someone was fighting his fight, and not later but now, in front of everyone. "Eat up, little man," Tupac said, quieter, just for him. "You don't owe nobody here a thing." Jamal nodded, took another bite. His eyes still avoided Collins, but not out of shame anymore, because there was something more important in front of him, his burger, untouched, under the protection of a man who wouldn't let anyone take it away. Collins ran a hand over his face. Tried to keep his chin up, but it was getting harder. Tupac wasn't giving him room to hide behind formality. No "sir" or "excuse me." Just short, sharp truths laid bare in front of customers, employees, and cell phones. "If that's how you run a restaurant, man, then you're not running anything. You're just making enemies." In the back, the woman who had earlier murmured, "This isn't right," was now staring straight at Collins. Her lips trembled, but her eyes said that if needed, she would back up every word Tupac had just spoken. Collins swallowed hard. For the first time, he seemed to realize the restaurant wasn't with him anymore, and that the conversation wasn't ending here, and it wouldn't, because Tupac still had plenty more to say, and the next part wouldn't be just for Collins, but for everyone who was watching. Collins took a step forward. It wasn't much, just a short movement, but loaded with the kind of intention from someone who thinks they can take back control by closing the distance. It was the classic move of a manager used to intimidating people. But Tupac caught it before the man's foot even touched the floor. He stood up. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't explosive. It was calculated, almost slow, but with the steadiness of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. The scrape of the chair against the thin tile floor made a few heads turn. The leather jacket opened slightly, revealing the black hoodie underneath, and the gold chain tapped lightly against his chest. Tupac stepped forward half a pace, and in the next instant, the space between Jamal and Collins no longer existed. He was in the middle. His left hand rested on the boy's shoulder, heavy, steady. Jamal felt that weight like a shield materializing over him. It wasn't the pressure of someone telling him to stay put. It was the weight that says, "As long as I'm here, nobody's laying a hand on you." "Back up," Tupac said, his voice low but cutting like a sharp blade. Collins froze half a meter away. The air went out of his puffed-up chest just a bit. He glanced around, as if searching for allies among the customers, but found none. What he did find were curious stares, a few disapproving looks, and at least 4 phones pointed straight at him. The sounds of the restaurant seemed clearer now. The fryer beeping in the back, the register's insistent chirp, the low murmur of people talking. Even a kid at the table near the window spoke louder than he should have. "Mommy, is that Tupac?" The mother put a finger to her lips, but couldn't hide her smile. The truth was, everyone already knew. Collins tried to recover. He cleared his throat. "You can't." Tupac raised his right hand, cutting him off before he could finish the sentence. He didn't need to raise his voice. "I can, and I will, and you're not getting near him again." That's when the silence changed. It wasn't the uncomfortable hush of passive witnesses anymore. Now it was the attentive pause of people who knew they were watching a moment turn into history. The energy in the air had a different weight. A man in a Yankees cap, sitting near the door, spoke loud enough to carry across the room. "Leave the boy alone, man." Two young guys sharing fries nodded, and a woman at the counter crossed her arms, looking Collins up and down. The tide was turning. It was no longer a manager against a defenseless kid. It was a manager alone against a man who wouldn't back down, and a crowd beginning to pick a side. Tupac lowered his gaze to Jamal and spoke calmly but firmly. "You're safe. Eat in peace." The tone was almost paternal, but carried that street energy that gave the words weight. Jamal looked up for a moment, as if to confirm it was real. His eyes met Tupac's, and there was certainty there. He looked back at his burger, unwrapped it carefully, and took another bite, this time without hurry. Tupac's hand stayed on his shoulder for a few more seconds, sealing an invisible pact. "As long as I'm here, you belong in this place." Collins stepped back half a pace. Not much. Enough to avoid looking like retreat, but enough to admit he couldn't move forward anymore. He fussed with his tie, straightened his posture, but said nothing. Any words now would only make things worse. Everyone in the restaurant knew, they could feel it. The balance of power had flipped, and Collins, who moments ago had commanded the space with a loud voice and a badge, now seemed smaller than the boy he'd tried to throw out. Tupac, unhurried, pulled up a chair and sat next to Jamal. The position was clear, still facing Collins, still ready to get up if needed. But in that moment, the message had been delivered. In the corner, the woman who had earlier murmured, "This isn't right," now stood straight, staring at Collins without flinching. The teenager filming zoomed in on Tupac and Jamal together, framing the symbol that this moment was becoming. The noise from the street still drifted in through the automatic door, Spanish voices, honking horns, the call of a fruit seller. But inside that McDonald's, the world had shrunk to three figures: the boy, the man protecting him, and the manager who no longer knew where to put his hands. And in that moment, everyone understood. From here on out, Collins wouldn't have the last word, and Jamal wouldn't be alone again. Tupac didn't take his eyes off Collins. It wasn't loud, showy anger. It was focus. The kind of focus that makes the other person start to see themselves from the outside, as if a camera were filming everything, and in fact, it was. The teenager in the back held his phone with both hands, making sure the shot didn't shake. "So tell me, boss," Tupac began with that street corner tone, no frills. "You checking IDs to sell burgers now, or just when it's him?" Collins opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced quickly around, as if searching for a sign to save him. "There was no sign for this, 'cause I'm seeing families eating without trays, people taking up 2 tables with their coats, and nobody's getting a lecture," Tupac went on, tipping his chin slightly, as if pointing out evidence to a jury. "But the kid who paid, he's the one you kicked out. What's the rule again?" A stifled laugh slipped from a table near the window. The Yankees cap man let out an "uh-huh" and tapped his pinky on the tabletop, keeping rhythm like someone agreeing in church. Collins tried to get his voice back. "Look, I was just what?" Tupac cut in, never raising his volume. "Just used your badge to humiliate a kid? Just decided his face didn't fit your restaurant?" The words hung in the air like neon signs. Someone in the back whispered, "True." The cashier who had handed Jamal his tray lifted her gaze for the first time and tucked her hair behind her ear. as if that small gesture could straighten the world. Tupac set 2 fingers on the table near Jamal's tray and spoke so the whole room could hear. Respect don't cost a thing, but disrespect gets expensive, especially when the neighborhood's watching. A mother with 2 kids crossed her arms, protective. We are watching. The phrase, half English, half warning, moved through the tables like a slow fire. Collins gave that corner of the mouth smile that never reaches the eyes. You putting on a show, is that it? No, man, Tupac answered, almost smiling but without humor. A show's when there's music and pretty lights. This here is just you, your badge, and a bad decision in somebody else's neighborhood. He pointed toward the coffee machine. Over there, the coffee's burned. Didn't see that. Floor by the door's slick. Didn't see that either. But a kid with change in his pocket, you spotted that from across the room. 2 guys by the window gave short laughs. Not mockery. Recognition. The scene was turning into a small public court, and with each line, Tupac was rearranging the chairs. And I'll tell you something else, he continued, leaning forward a few inches. If your problem's how the customer looks, you picked the wrong address. East Harlem's always been a mix. Around here, respect runs things, not a crooked tie. The hit didn't come with a shout. It came measured. Collins felt it. His hand slid into his pocket, the reflex of someone searching for a talisman, but he found only fabric. He pulled it back out awkwardly. Jamal, who until now had just been chewing, took a deeper breath. With every sentence from Tupac, the world around him seemed to fit again. The sound of the cheeseburger wrapper opening, the salty smell of fry oil, the heat of the dining room, all of it settled back into place. Let's keep it clean, Tupac said, turning his palm over like laying a card on the table. You apologize to him now, in front of everyone, and give him back the seat you took. The words apologize to him lit up eyes. The woman at the counter stepped forward half a pace, holding her breath. The teenager with the phone moved in closer, nearly filling the frame. The Yankees capman leaned in, looking for the answer on Collins's face. I'd to think there was a misunderstanding, Collins tried, using that bureaucratic phrase meant to put out fires with fog. I didn't mean don't pay the damage, Tupac shot back. What pays is owning it, apologizing and fixing it. Silence. Not the kind that shields, the kind that demands. Outside, a distant siren cut through 116th Street. Inside, you could hear the tick of the cheap wall clock and the friar's beep calling to whoever was ignoring it. The city stayed the same, but that McDonald'S didn't. All right, sorry then, Collins let out quietly, pushing the word with his tongue like it weighed something. Louder, Tupac said, unblinking. So he hears it, and so the people filming hear it too. Collins breathed, adjusted the useless tie. Sorry, he repeated, this time with volume. Sorry, kid. It didn't sound pretty. It didn't need to. It just needed to be public. Tupac nodded, a minimal gesture. Good. Now finish the rest. He pointed to the menu. Go swap that cheeseburger for a real meal and get 2 apple pies and a sundae. The boy's gonna eat in peace. The cashier stepped forward. I'll get it. There was relief in her voice, like someone had finally opened a window after too long. Collins, for a second, had no role. The badge didn't come with instructions for this moment. He stepped back half a pace, glanced toward the back door, as if a hallway could offer him escape. But the crowd didn't blink. The teenager kept filming. The woman who had once whispered now held her chin high, and the Yankees capman folded his arms. Silent neighborhood judge. Tupac turned his head just enough for Collins to catch the side of his gaze. And if I come by tomorrow and hear you did this to another kid, he said, clear, without empty threats, there'll be more people with me. Got it? Collins nodded. Not agreement, but the nod of someone recognizing they'd lost the handle. The new tray arrived. Crispy fries, wrapper still warm, sundae sweating in its cup. Tupac slid it toward Jamal with a simple gesture. Eat, your way, your time. The room let out the breath it had been holding. It wasn't celebration yet, but it was a start. The tables had turned, and everyone had seen who turned them. Outside, East Harlem's cold wind kept sliding around the corners. Inside, one quiet phrase hung in the air, enough on its own. Respect costs nothing, and when someone decides to collect, the bill comes due for the one who owes. The new tray in front of Jamal looked bigger than the first. Same plastic table, same crumpled paper under the cheeseburger, same hot fries giving off that salty smell. But the weight was different. Now it wasn't just food, it was proof. Proof that someone had decided he deserved to be there and had made sure everyone saw it. Tupac wasn't satisfied with handing back the food and moving on. He knew that if he let the moment fade, the story would end as soon as Jamal finished the last fry. And then, the next day, the same thing could happen to another kid. He wasn't the kind of man to leave a crack open. He preferred to seal it on the spot. He turned his chair slightly to the right, opening his body to face the whole room. His left hand still rested on the table, but his torso leaned forward, the posture of someone stepping into the center of a circle. You all saw that, right? His voice wasn't a shout, but it had the firmness of an order that cuts down a school hallway and makes everyone look up. 4 tables reacted first, quick glances, a few nods. Others took longer, like they needed to check if it was safe to get involved. Everybody saw it, and everybody knows this wasn't the first time. Not the first kid to go through this, and if we don't do anything, it won't be the last. Tupac braced an elbow on the edge of the table, eyes sweeping the room. The teenager in the back, the one who'd been filming since the start, lowered his phone just long enough to swallow hard, then raised it again. The Yankees cap man by the door gave a quiet "uh-huh," like someone who'd seen scenes like this too many times before. "So I'm gonna ask, so we don't forget," Tupac went on, "who here thinks he deserved to be treated the way he was?" Silence. Not even a cough. Collins, leaning on the side door, looked away like he'd spotted something on the floor. "And who thinks he deserved to sit and eat like everybody else?" Tupac raised his hand. First, a woman by the window raised hers, shy. Then a couple in the corner did the same. 2, 3 more hands followed. The woman lifted both of hers as if to make up for the one still hesitating. Tupac let the silence stretch for a few seconds, long enough for everyone to feel the weight of their own gesture. That's it. That's how it starts. Today, it's here. Tomorrow it could be on the street, at school, in a store, and then there might not be anyone filming, no one to remind people of the basics. Respect. Respect isn't a favor. It's a duty. A mother with 2 kids shifted in her seat, pulling them close. She looked at Collins, then back at Tupac. "We are watching," she said, and it wasn't just a warning. It was a commitment. The murmur moved through the room like wind through open curtains. The cashier, who at first had seemed to shrink behind the register, now watched with steady eyes. She didn't smile, but there was something different in her face, a relief mixed with courage, borrowed from the moment. Collins crossed his arms, maybe trying to look firm, but his stance betrayed discomfort. Every short laugh or low yeah from the tables seemed to push him further into the shadow of the door. Tupac, still seated beside Jamal, took a sip from his soda without breaking his gaze on the room. Then he set the cup down and said, like closing a meeting, "Respect isn't optional. It's the foundation. Forget that, and you lose everything." The words landed heavy in the air. The Yankees capman smacked his palm on the table, sharp, as if stamping what had just been said. A young woman with her hair pulled back, who until then had stayed quiet, called out, "That's right," with conviction. Jamal, silent, kept eating and watching. His shoulders were lower now, his breathing calmer. For the first time that afternoon, he looked around without fear of meeting accusing eyes. Now, the looks were different. Supportive, knowing, in solidarity. Tupac leaned toward him, lowering his voice. "See, it's not just me. There's more people here who care. They just needed to be reminded." Jamal didn't answer, but gripped his cup more firmly. Maybe it was too soon to smile, but not too soon to feel that the weight he carried had gotten a little lighter. The teenager filming was already narrating softly into his phone. "This is historic, posting it tonight." He knew the video would spread. And Tupac, though he didn't say it, knew that was the most powerful part, because it wouldn't just be the people in the room who would see it. Outside the glass door, 116th Street kept up its late afternoon rhythm. Coats zipped against the wind, shopping bags swinging, horns blending with the distant rumble of the subway. But inside that McDonald's, the feeling was different. There was no rush to finish the meal, no rush to go back to the outside world. It was as if everyone wanted to stay a little longer, just to hold on to the exact moment when the place stopped being the scene of humiliation and became a stage for defense. Tupac wasn't just defending Jamal. He was turning every person in that room into both a witness and a participant. And deep down, they all knew, after that day, if something like this happened in front of them, it wouldn't be so easy to stay silent. Collins stayed leaned against the side door, arms crossed, chin slightly lifted, trying to salvage what little authority he still thought he had. But it was too late. The room was no longer his, and he knew it. Every glance he caught, every whisper he heard, reminded him that he'd lost control of the story. Tupac, seated beside Jamal with his body still half turned toward the room, kept Collins in his peripheral vision. He didn't need to say anything now. Just being there, solid, present, kept the manager pinned to his corner. Then the glass front door opened again. The familiar metallic ding cut through the air. But this time, it wasn't another regular customer. A woman in a dark suit stepped in, ID badge hanging from her neck, quick steps, an expression that mixed urgency with irritation. Some recognized her on sight, others simply noticed she wasn't there to eat. The cashier's eyes widened and her posture straightened. "Regional manager," she whispered to a co-worker, barely moving her lips. The woman crossed the dining room like someone who knew she was walking into a poorly explained situation. Her heels struck the tile floor in a sharp rhythm. She went straight to Collins. "Can we talk in the back office? Now." Collins tried to keep a neutral face, but color rose up his neck. He glanced sideways at the audience, watching him more closely than ever. Sure," he answered, his voice a few tones lower than before. But before he could take a step, the regional manager looked at Tupac, at Jamal, and at the still full tray. "This where it happened?" she asked, more to herself than to the room. No one answered out loud, but the collective reaction said everything. A few nodded, others looked at her and then at Collins, as if handing her the culprit. The cashier couldn't hold back. It was. And there are people who filmed all of it. Collins blinked faster, the look of someone already calculating the damage. The teenager in the back lifted his phone, as if confirming the offer of proof. Tupac broke the silence in a voice almost too calm. "Everybody saw, and everybody knows why he did what he did." The regional manager didn't reply directly to Tupac, but the tension in her shoulders showed she understood. She turned back to Collins. "Let's go. Now." Collins swallowed hard. There was no authority in his badge that could override hers. Still, before moving, he tried one last card. "I was just trying to keep order." Tupac raised an eyebrow, just a small motion, but enough to deflate the sentence in the air. Order isn't throwing out a kid who paid for his food, Tupac said, without raising his tone. Order is making sure everybody here gets treated like a person. The regional manager didn't waste another second. Back office now. The sound of her heels and Collins's shoes echoed as they walked down the narrow hallway to the service door. When it shut, the muffled sound of a tense conversation began to drift out from behind the counter. The dining room exhaled. Some people went back to eating, but their eyes kept flicking toward the hallway. It was like watching the final act of a play. They knew Collins's return wouldn't be triumphant. Jamal, still chewing, looked at Tupac with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. They'll deal with him, Tupac replied without going into detail. And if they don't, we'll make sure they do. That promise, spoken simply and firmly, felt more reliable than any corporate policy. Minutes later, Collins reappeared, but he wasn't the same man who had yanked Jamal's tray away. The flush in his face betrayed the scolding he'd just received. His posture was smaller, and his badge hung crooked as if it no longer belonged on his chest. He crossed the dining room without looking at anyone. The regional manager returned to the counter and called the cashier over. There was no official announcement, but everyone understood Collins was out, at least for now. The woman by the window was the first to speak up. That was the least they could do. And she wasn't saying it to a friend, she was saying it to everyone. The teenager stopped recording and gave a small, knowing smile, already imagining the video's reach. Two young men bumped fists like celebrating a neighborhood win. Tupac turned to Jamal. "Let's go. I want to meet your family." Jamal's eyes widened. "My family? Yeah. I want to see who raised a kid who, even when treated like nothing, still stayed standing." Jamal swallowed the rest of the fry in his hand quickly. The thought of Tupac walking to his house seemed too unreal to fit into the day, but Tupac was already getting to his feet, pulling on his jacket. When they stepped outside, East Harlem's cold air wrapped around them. The sky was streaked with orange and gray, and the lights of the Latin shops were coming on one by one. Tupac adjusted his beanie and nodded toward the street. "Lead the way." Inside the McDonald's's, conversation resumed, but with a different energy. People spoke in lower tones, like discussing a story they knew was going to spread. And it would, not just through the video, but through collective memory. The image of Collins leaving through the back door, beaten in front of his own neighborhood, would stick. Not because Tupac humiliated him, but because he exposed what was wrong and made sure it got fixed, right there in front of everyone. And Jamal, walking beside him on the sidewalk, felt something he hadn't in a long time. Safe. Not just because of the man at his side, but because that day he'd seen that yes, someone could stand up and turn the game around. The East Harlem wind cut like a blade, carrying the smell of fresh bread mixed with the exhaust of buses climbing 116th Street. Jamal walked a step ahead, nervous, the forgotten coins in his pocket tapping against his leg with each step. To his left, Tupac moved calmly, hands in his leather jacket, beanie pulled down to his eyebrows. They turned a corner into a narrower street, where red brick buildings stood lined up like old sentinels. Some windows had flags hanging, others glowed with warm yellow light spilling through curtains. Somewhere above, a radio played salsa, while at street level, a couple leaned on a window talking softly. Jamal stopped in front of a plain door with peeling paint and a worn doormat that read, "Welcome." He hesitated a moment before turning the handle. "My grandma might get startled," he murmured, unsure if he was more worried or excited. "Then we'll go in slow," Tupac said, his tone carrying a rare kind of respect, like someone who understands he's about to step into sacred space. The door opened, and the smell hit. Bread in the oven, chamomile tea, and that soft scent of a lived-in home. An older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes appeared in the kitchen doorway. She wore a floral apron and held a dish towel. "Jamal? Who is—" The sentence died in her throat when she saw Tupac. Her eyes widened and her hand found the wall for support. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Tupac said, stepping forward but keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Tupac. I had the luck to meet your grandson today." She blinked as if convincing herself this wasn't a dream. Then a small but warm smile spread across her face. "Please, come in." Tupac entered slowly, taking in the room like reading a story told on the walls. Old photos, a hand-stitched quilt on the couch, a faded 1996 Yankees poster. In the corner, a small TV played a muted local news broadcast. Jamal dropped his hoodie on a chair and ran to the oven. "Grandma, look what he brought." Tupac set 2 full bags on the table. Out came boxes of food, fresh fruit, even a tub of ice cream. Today he didn't just eat, he was seen, Tupac said, meeting her eyes. The woman rested her hand on the table, absorbing his words. "A lot of people see, but few stop," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion. They sat, and conversation began to flow. Tupac asked about her health, about Jamal's mother, listening with full attention, leaning forward as if every detail mattered. "He's a good boy," the grandmother said, glancing at her grandson, "but the world sometimes tries to convince him otherwise." "The world's loud," Tupac agreed, "but we can teach him to hear his own voice first." Jamal stayed quiet, fiddling with the lid of a juice bottle but taking in every word. After a moment, Tupac looked at him. "What are your dreams, Jamal?" The boy shrugged, shy. "I don't know. Maybe study, play basketball, have money to help Grandma." "Then start there," Tupac said, tapping 2 fingers lightly on the table. "Go to school, stay out of trouble. And remember, it's not about being accepted everywhere. It's about knowing you belong anywhere you choose to be." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. Inside was a grocery voucher and a card with a phone number. "If you need anything, call me. And Saturday, there's a community event. I want you there, Jamal, front row. And if you want, bring your grandma too." She smiled, eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you. For today. For him." Tupac shook his head humbly. "He's already got everything he needs to be great. He just has to remember it every day." When he stood to leave, Jamal hurried to the door. For the first time that afternoon, he smiled for real, a smile that seemed to open space in his chest. And as the cold wind swept back in, the feeling inside the house was different. Warmth, safety, and the certainty that this was a day neither of them would forget anytime soon. 2 months later, East Harlem woke up to that kind of cold that nips the tip of your nose, but with a buzz that had nothing to do with the weather. At the community center on 120th, the court gleamed under new lights, freshly painted, white lines straight as a promise. Blue tents lined one side, serving hot dogs, fruit, steaming water in foam cups. In the next field over, speakers played neighborhood classics, old soul, then a smooth beat rap. It was Saturday, community event day. Jamal arrived early, clean hoodie, worn sneakers laced with care, hair trimmed at home by his grandma the night before. In his hands a cardboard box, notebooks, pencils, little packs of erasers. Supplies that, not long ago, had been hard to come by. Now he handed them out to other kids one by one, checking each backpack for the basics. Every thank you felt like another brick in something new inside him. His grandmother came later, arm in arm with a neighbor. The wind tugged at her coat hem, but her smile was stubborn, the kind cold couldn't bend. When she saw the distribution table, she lifted her chin proudly. Her grandson was on the right side of the story, and everyone could see it. In the middle of the bustle, someone called out laughing, "Remember the video?" How could anyone forget? What happened at the McDonald's had become barbershop talk, bodega talk, family talk. First, it was the phone video from the kid in the back of the restaurant, then the whole city. That he's sitting with me had hit the internet like a drumbeat. NY1 came and did a short segment. The corner church brought it up that Sunday. And days later, a printed letter was taped to the McDonald's door. We apologize. Our commitment is to respect for all. Next to it, a new sign. Everyone is welcome here. As for Collins, suspended indefinitely. People passing by the store had no mercy, lost more than his badge. Tupac showed up when the sun had climbed enough to catch in the brick windows. No entourage. He came through the side gate, dark beanie, leather jacket, walking with that pace the neighborhood could spot from a block away. First thing, he greeted every volunteer, carrying boxes, helping without showmanship. Only then did he step onto the small wooden stage, propped up on sawhorses, mic in hand, faint speaker hiss in the background. The chatter quieted. Curious kids moved closer. "Good morning, family," he said, voice clear, unhurried. "Today is about serving." It wasn't a long speech, simple, direct. He spoke about respect as the foundation, about how a neighborhood becomes a shield when it refuses to bow its head, about how small things, a cup of water, a sit here and I see you, can shift the course of a day and sometimes a life. At one point, without quoting a verse, he let a little of that keep your head up spirit slip in, not as performance, but as reminder. "Some of you saw what happened," he went on, meeting the crowd's eyes without flinching. "Others heard about it. We're not here to replay the humiliation. We're here to multiply the defense. The lesson's this: when we stand up for one, we stand up for all." Applause, first tentative, then strong, swelling like rain on a roof. Jamal's grandmother dabbed her eyes with a pocket handkerchief and laughed at herself for doing it. The neighbor nudged her arm. "He's doing good, girl. He's doing good." At the end, Tupac called Jamal up. The boy climbed the steps in short strides, chest tight with the mix of being seen and still not quite believing it. When he stood beside Tupac, the mic lowered a notch. "Tell him what you're doing with all these notebooks," Tupac said, a whisper that was also a push. Jamal cleared his throat, looked at the crowd, and for a second saw the restaurant again, the tray snatched, the cup spilling water. But right after, he saw something else. The table in the center, the hand on his shoulder, the phrase that stopped the room. His voice came out steady enough. "I want every kid to have school supplies," he said, and for no one to be treated like they don't belong. "The place is yours," Tupac told the crowd, opening his hand like showing them a map. Off to the side, a tarp covered something leaning against the chain-link fence. Two boys pulled it free, and the image appeared, a new mural painted by neighborhood artists. It showed the McDonald's scene, reimagined. Jamal seated in the center, not small, but big, whole, owning the table like it was his. Beside him, Tupac's silhouette. No flashy detail, just enough to know who it was. On the restaurant walls, colorful patterns evoking the flags hanging from East Harlem windows. Across the top, in bold letters, "Respect lives here." The murmur turned into an "oh." The kids stepped up, hunting for familiar faces in the painted details. An older man pointed to the outline of a Yankees cap in the corner. A mom snapped a photo, arms stretched, her two daughters tucked into her side. After the stage, the lunch line formed without pushing. Jamal stepped down and returned to his table, this time moving like someone who knew exactly why he was there. He handed out kits, accepted hugs, answered questions. His grandmother sat under one of the tents, hands resting in her lap, watching. Sometimes she closed her eyes for a moment, as if speaking silently to someone she missed. Maybe her daughter, maybe her own past. Mid-afternoon, boxes of more donations arrived. Hoodies, socks, notebooks. A volunteer came over. "Community clinic setting up an appointment for your mom, Jamal." The boy blinked hard, and the world seemed to sharpen for the second time that day. Simple rewards outweighed any trophy, a doctor's visit booked, school supplies ready, a neighborhood now knowing his name without wrinkling its nose. By 4, the cold tightened its grip. The tents began to come down, but the mural stayed. Someone suggested a big group photo to end it right. They gathered in front of the painting, Tupac in the middle, Jamal on one side, his grandmother on the other, and behind them, neighbors, kids, volunteers. The camera clicked just as a stubborn wind whipped through, tugging at blanket corners and nudging hats. When they looked at the shot on the screen, they fell silent for a beat. The image had something final about it, the kind you put on the fridge and in your heart at the same time. Back home, Grandma placed the printed photo next to the faded one she kept from the other McDonald's, the one with the old laughter, her daughter, and a small boy. The two pictures faced each other as if in conversation, the memory that sustained the dream and the day the dream got its protection. Late that night, when East Harlem's lights blinked out one by one and the subway's rumble carried on underground, Jamal sat at the kitchen table with a new notebook open. He wrote just a few lines. Saturday, today I served, today I was seen. He paused, heard the kettle on the stove, smelled the faint chamomile in the air. And he smiled to himself, the kind of smile that makes your face look grown for a second. Somewhere not far away, Tupac scrolled through the last messages of the day. Thanks, videos, plans to repeat the event in other courts. He knew what happened in the restaurant wasn't a miracle, it was a method. Intervene, invert, include, repeat until it becomes habit. At the McDonald's on 116th and Lexington, a discreet plaque near the register now read, "Commitment to respect and welcome." The cashier who stayed, the one with the shy smile, the one who'd lifted her eyes for the first time that afternoon, had learned to recognize the moment when the right word lands. When she saw a kid walk in with change in his pocket, she looked them in the eye and said, "Welcome." Not because someone told her to, because she understood. The video still makes the rounds, of course. But in the neighborhood, what stuck was how the story's told. Remember the day a boy almost got thrown out and the restaurant turned into a classroom? And every time they tell it, they keep the focus where it belongs, not on the humiliation, but on the point where someone said, "He's sitting with me," and the rest of the room had to rearrange itself around that sentence. In the end, when the house was quiet and Grandma switched off the kitchen light, the new photo still caught a bit of glow from the street lamp outside. It wasn't a miracle. It was a reminder of a simple rule, easy to keep, hard to forget, because dignity, once returned, can't be taken away again.